Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. In January 2010, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission that big business corporations can give as much money as they want to election campaigns. The narrowest possible 5-4 majority overturned a century of settled law that had protected election campaigns from excess corporate influence. This decision further entrenched the notion, well, it also enriched some folks too, but it entrenched the notion that money is speech and that corporations are persons who have free speech rights, same as real live human beings like you and I do. The Citizens United decision and the notion of corporate personhood are parts of a bold escalation of big business power grabs. In addition to buying elections, these giant corporations are increasingly aggressive in trying to manipulate regulatory agencies and to dominate all levels of government. The problem might be seeming too big, and solving it might seem too daunting, but it really is quite workable. We can solve the problem, but we have to pitch in and create the solutions. During this hour, we will examine the problems and we'll also explore the solutions. I'm happy to welcome 3 guests who are all active in the Olympia Move to Amend group, a group working to amend the Constitution to remove the notion of corporate personhood. They are Bert Lewis, Alita DeBee, and Dave Zink. Good to have you all here. We will have fun with this topic. It might not seem juicy at the outset, but people will discover, hey, this really pertains to my life. And Alita, let's start with you, because when we were preparing for the program, you were saying how there really are a lot of ways in our day-to-day lives where this connects. Tell us about that.
Definitely does connect. I have been looking at this issue for many years, and I realized from the outset that just about every part of my life it has to do with this topic. Everything from the commons, which is my water, my air, the land that I live on, the earth, everything that we consider something we share seems to be used by corporations in an unsustainable way. And they are using these things to the point of depleting them, or almost depleting them, at least making them very expensive for others to use. And also they are polluting them and making them unhealthy. So our health is involved with this, our day-to-day living with water and food, just about everything that's important to us.
Yeah, when we were
like
on the
food.
phone to prepare for you said, well, like take corn chips. You know, you buy some corn chips at the grocery store, and you were able to trace through how the use of that corn, through the giant agribusiness corporations that may have engineered the seeds and packaged it and done all the processing. And I mean, you go, yeah, there's big corporations involved in every step of that, and they're manipulating processes in ways that work to their advantage and against ours.
Yes, and part of the reason for that is profit. And profit means that the large agribusinesses are buying up smaller farms, making it so smaller farms have a harder time competing, and they're using their strength and power and their speech to manipulate the market so that they own the market.
So we'll talk during this hour about those kinds of things and the notion of corporate personhood, which we'll describe. There's another element of this program that has to do with how they mess up democracy by buying elections and so forth. Is there something that anybody wants to say at the outset about just that notion of the impact on democracy? And then we'll get on into some substance.
Well, the recent midterm elections just last year, 2010, I think that's a pretty good indication of what's coming. Massive amounts of corporate money coming in from outside the state to totally swamp the local concerns we have here.
One of the main points in the program is addressing this notion of corporate personhood that some people watching the show might know what that is and some people might not know. The notion, in terms of, in order to be able to enter into contracts or do business, a corporation is considered to be an artificial person so that it can actually sign a contract or do whatever. But the notion of a person has sort of gone way beyond that and traces back to an 1886 U.S. Supreme Court case, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad Company, where somebody in the judge's office made a mistake and sort of misstated something.
There is debate about that. That may not have been a mistake. He had financial ties with the railroads.
Oh, okay. There you go. Anyway, could somebody talk about the concept? Maybe you could tell us something about this concept. What does that mean, the corporate personhood?
Well, since that time, corporations have, their lawyers really, have attempted to gain for corporations all constitutional rights. A right to privacy, a nice one. And they have it, of course, because they are corporate people. And just as you and I have a right to privacy, so does the corporation. So when our meat inspectors go to the meat packing plant and knock on the door and want to come in and inspect, they're turned away. They can't do that because the corporation has a right to privacy. Our inspectors today, OSHA, go in to look for some sort of dangerous situation in the plant, has to not only announce their visit in advance, they have to get a warrant. They have to go to courts and get a warrant to do their inspection because of the right to privacy. And of course, we're going to come back, I'm sure, to talk more about the First Amendment rights.
Right. Yeah, you bet.
That are in Citizens United.
Right. Yeah. And so they've sort of crept into the area that we as real live human beings have, and they claim that those, and of course, all of us will die at some point.
Oh, yes.
I hope we make it through this hour of the program, but at some point we'll all go, but the corporation can live forever, and so you get that huge imbalance. Also, the giant corporations have a lot more money than,
the money is,
than any of us, so it's an imbalance.
And people like us, we have more interests than just making money. We've got clean air, clean water, our kids' health, a lot of interest that real people have. But the corporation is a legal entity fixated on maximizing profit, maximizing profit. Concentrate on that. So if that was a person, it'd be a very psychopathic person.
Right, and they have the officers and the managers actually have an obligation to maximize profit in their role, whereas the rest of us have to factor in ethics. I need to treat my neighbors fairly. I need to, maintain good human relations, and the corporations
And quite often,
don't.
to maximize profit, what you want to do, of course, is socialize all of the cost of whatever you're doing and privatize the profits.
Right.
And consequently, and that brings us back to the common.
Yeah, right.
Because quite often, some sort of environmental degradation, some sort of dumping of whatever, goes to the common. It goes into that river.
Air pollution.
Air pollution, whatever.
So tell us some more about that notion of the commons, where that came from, and how that
I think
pertains.
Bert knows about the commons a little bit more.
It's from the early days of this country. New England villages would be built in a rectangular pattern with a common area in the center. And that's where they would put their sheep and so on. It was fenced off for the use of the people of the village. It was the common ground. And of course the problem, there's a whole metaphor for the tragedy of the commons. And the tragedy is that the best way for an individual to get something out of the commons is to put more sheep in it. But of course, if everybody does that, it destroys the commons.
Right.
And that's a problem. The commons need to be protected.
Well, and that's why we create governments
Yeah, of
to
course,
regulate
of course,
things, to
of
say, look, we got to find a way to manage this so we can all share it equitably. So you can't put more than your
Yeah,
share of
right,
sheep
right,
out there, and you can't dump your garbage there, and you can't drill for oil there. We have to protect this so that we can all share this in common.
That's right. And the idea of privatizing the profits from it, you take the oil, you take the things out of the commons, and you take the profits and you walk away.
Right.
But as far as cleanup afterwards,
Yeah.
the cleanup is sometimes just left to the people or to the governments to
Right.
clean up.
Yeah. If I have a factory and I pollute, I dump my waste in the river, and you're downstream, you're drinking that.
Right.
But it kept my costs low. I externalized my costs, and it makes you
Right.
sick. But that's not my problem,
That's not-
because all I care about is my own profit, and to heck with your health.
That's right.
So yeah. Let's follow up on this thread a bit about how the notion of corporate personhood makes some of these problems worse than the notion of, well, kind of like what we're saying. I mean, what examples are we seeing? What have we had things in the news? Are there things that ordinary people that we know are concerned about?
Well, here's one. Corporations have a right to privacy. All right?
Well, so they say, if they're persons.
If they're people, yes, well, they are, according to our Supreme Court.
Okay.
We've had 150 years of them building that right
Right.
to be a person. Okay. So they have a right to privacy. Dairy industry does not want to put on dairy products whether or not the bovine growth hormone is in the milk, is in whatever it is.
Right.
And they have successfully argued that it is their right of privacy to not say what they do not want to say
Right.
about the products.
But the ordinary consumer wants to make sure that we don't buy milk that has
Yeah, of
bovine growth hormone in it.
Of course.
Exactly.
But so as an individual, my right to make that choice about my health is gone because the corporations have claimed this other right, and they have more clout and they got more lawyers.
They've trumped it,
Yeah.
Not only that, but they've sued companies, dairy companies, that did put bovine growth hormone free on their label because the company producing this hormone said that you're implying that there's something wrong with this product. Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
So, let's see. Let's talk a bit about this decision that was in January 2010, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission. Could somebody tell? I think were going to tell us about what that is. What
that is?
What that was.
Well, Citizens United, of course, has become a catchphrase. I think
Yeah.
many people are aware of it. Many groups are arguing against it across the United States. Many people have a somewhat mistaken notion of it, though. What they say is that corporations are people, and that is a long history of precedents in the various cases. And if they are people, they have First Amendment rights to free speech. Okay, if they're people, they have free speech. Now, they do say this is based actually in a 1977 case, that speech is money when you're a corporation. That's how a corporation speaks. Okay. Consequently, they did not change the laws in terms of how much money a corporation can give to it specifically. They didn't change laws on how much it can give in very general terms. They did change the law saying that the corporation can use its general funds directly. It can take money from its general fund, give it directly to a political campaign, to a political party. They do not have to go through a PAC. They do not have to go through a 501 corporation type. They can, of course, if they want to. And I think most of them will continue to, because otherwise they're sort of out in front.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway,
So
basically that's it.
Yeah,
They can spend money.
But what have been the implications of that? What happened as a result?
Well,
In the-
Dave has mentioned it already.
In the last election, there was initiative. I can't remember the number right now, but it was the one about the soft drinks, the sugary drinks.
yes.
And they wanted to put a pretty modest tax on that. Well, there was all kinds of money coming in from bottling companies, sugar companies from out of state, that just made it look like, oh, this would be terrible if we had this.
Well, they misrepresented those.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And they had way more money than anybody who wanted to correct the information and say, you know, like if I say, wait a minute, these guys are deceiving the voters, I want to put an ad on that'll correct the information so the voters can actually have valid information to decide. But I don't have as much money as those out-of-state people do, so they were able to fool the voters.
They can totally dominate the campaigns and political discourse going on.
So there's not an honest conversation.
Right. Yep.
I'm sure the four of us are not the only people in the country that are upset about this. What has been the response in this country to the Citizens United decision of January 2010?
It's been quite astounding, actually. There have been a number of petitions going around, and they have hundreds of thousands of signatures. They're reaching, well, I don't know, if I add them all together, it's probably well over 1 million signatures now. It was instant, and it was very strong, the reaction.
Some of the
right ahead.
original reaction was to a large extent along the liberal conservative lines. Conservative court justices were saying, just because it is a corporation, it's no different than a very wealthy individual spending money. And consequently, it's free speech, and that was accepted. But within about 6 months, there were a number of studies, a number of polls, and they've come out with like 78% of Democrats, 76% of Republicans, and about 80% of independents. So we're just about at 80% are against Citizens United
And it's across
The spectrum.
political spectrum.
And it's not very often that you see an issue that reaches pretty much equally across, and for valid reasons across. I mean, each point on the spectrum can raise arguments, and you go, oh, well, that makes sense, and somebody else, well, that makes sense, but they're all coming out against this thing.
Yes.
The thing that we want to argue, Move to Amend wants to argue, is that it is a symptom, and we certainly are opposed to Citizens United, and that should be overturned in some way. But we believe it is a symptom of that wider personhood. Citizens United is their freedom of speech, First Amendment, but they've also got, the Fifth Amendment, the Seventh Amendment, the 14th Amendment. They've got all these others.
That's right.
That are also, this is a symptom of a bigger problem.
Right, and they bring those out as the case may be on whatever the issue is.
Yes.
And so it goes back. It all goes back to corporate personhood.
Even the Second Amendment. I think there's some in the Constitution. It says that a private company doesn't have the right to raise a private army, but they're doing it. They look at the vast amount of security guards and stuff out there. You know, they're armed very often.
Well, and there's a lot of privatization of the military functions.
No.
Yes, yes.
So
Yes,
the remedy
yes.
that you folks and a lot of others around the country are proposing is to say, we need to clarify this by amending the Constitution. You can't just have Congress pass a law and say, we want to overturn the Citizens United decision, because the Supreme Court has already ruled in that matter.
Right.
And so Congress can't overrule the Supreme Court. And so the way to do it would be to go through a constitutional amendment process and actually change the Constitution. And one of the things I find so amazing about this thing was that when the argument was being made at the Supreme Court level, Chief Justice Roberts kind of opened up new lines of questioning of witnesses so he could sort of make a more expansive, he could sort of expand the issue and make more expansive ruling than what the initial case was coming up. And it was like, oh, so everybody was like seeing danger signs there. And I mean, so it really goes to the heart of the legitimacy of our judicial system, and we've really got to recapture the Constitution, which you hear a lot of conservative people say we got to recapture it, but I'm hearing people across the spectrum saying we've got to make sure that we go back to the
We had
protect this.
Move to Amend has done some public outreach, asking for signatures and so on, and presented a petition to the City of Olympia Council. In any case, while we were gathering those signatures, I actually had a conversation with 3 fellows who were very proud of the fact and pulled out some sort of a card. They were members of the Tea Party, and they were immediately ready to sign the petition,
Oh,
and
yeah.
they did.
Right. This
Yeah.
just really cuts across. So, what would somebody explain what the process would be for amending the Constitution, and what? And I've got some sample wording that I mean, there are different organizations that put forth different samples of wording. I've got a couple to share, but let's talk about the process of amending the Constitution, and then we can look at the wording.
Well, back in February, the Senate Joint Bill 8007, I think it was introduced, and that would
At the Washington State level.
to amend the state constitution, so to define legal person as Homo sapiens, flesh, blood, bone, real live people, not corporations. That was done at the state level, and there's other initiatives that are being started at the federal level. Now, I forget how many states have to ratify that. 2/3 of the states.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, so go ahead.
Well, there are 2 ways actually to amend the Constitution. One is for the states, each acting independently, to petition to petition Congress for a constitutional convention. And if 2/3 of the states do so, Congress must then call for a constitutional convention. That most people are very leery about.
I'm one of those. Yeah, it would open up
all kinds of things. The other way, of course, is for Congress itself. 2/3 of both houses can pass a constitutional amendment, acting independently, just the
Right.
two, just that. And that is the more desirable way. But can we get 2/3 of both houses to agree on anything today? It's going to be an uphill fight.
And there's
Yes,
a process
yes.
involving ratification by states. I remember at the time of the Equal Rights Amendment, we had almost enough states ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment so that women can have equal rights with men. And we fell just a bit short of that. So anyway, but I want to just share some possible wording. Several different organizations and people have put forth wording, and it's really pretty simple. And so one proposal says, this amendment affirms that constitutional rights extend only to human persons. Corporations, partnerships, and other organizational entities are not human persons and therefore are not entitled to constitutional protections. That's so clean and straightforward. And another alternative, and there are several, but I'm just listing two. The other one's even shorter. It says, for the purposes of the Constitution, corporations are public, not private. For the rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights are the rights of human beings, not corporations. So it's clean, simple. And so presumably somebody could coalesce around some.
Where there might not be so much simplicity is we have many laws that say things like people may not pollute Puget Sound. If corporations are not people, then a lot of laws are going to have to be redrafted.
Okay.
Because we do have that kind of a problem there.
Okay, so
It's a complex,
Yeah.
complex hard
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Does anybody have anything right now, or should I dig into the more of this? Okay.
Go ahead and dig.
In looking at what's happening around the country, I mean, other municipalities and states are moving ahead as you're trying to do in our own community. There have been big rallies. There's an effort introduced in Vermont, Madison, Wisconsin City Council and the County Council voted overwhelmingly to let voters decide in a referendum. So they said, well, let's have the people decide if we want to have our local government go on record, rather than have the City Council have to take the heat, or the county commissioners. Fort Bragg, California City Council will be voting on that soon. They may have by now. And then some people are having creative fun with it. Since corporations claim to be persons with constitutional rights, there's a local group in Florida that launched a campaign to have a human person marry a corporate person. And so I can imagine people having some fun with this issue and taking the notion of corporate personhood to its logical and ridiculous extremes.
Yes. I think Evergreen College is planning some fun things.
Okay. But this constitutional amendment process is not that daunting, and when during the Vietnam War, a lot of people were upset because folks who were 18, 19, 20 were being drafted, sent to Vietnam, and they didn't have the right to vote. And they said, look, if I'm old enough to get drafted and sent to war, I should be old enough to vote. And the public got it. The public said, yeah, that's fair. And it took just a very short time to amend the Constitution.
4 months.
And that was it. And they amended the Constitution, and we got that because it made sense to so many people.
Yep.
And this strikes me as something that also makes sense to a lot of people once you lay it out and say, how about that?
Yes. Yes.
So I want to pick up just a bit of history about corporate charters, because we have this notion that the corporations are invincible, and that the way things are now is the way it's always been, and it hasn't. Could somebody give a little bit of history about what happened with corporations in the past?
Go Corporations have been around. There's some evidence that the ancient Egyptians had a form of corporate business model. But in America, it really starts more with like the Massachusetts Bay Company. That was a corporation.
That basically was starting the colony of
Yes,
Massachusetts.
yes,
So,
yes. Corporation incorporated by the king, granted the license. And in the early days, for example, if you want to build the Erie Canal, one even very wealthy man can't do that. He needed a business unit of some sort, and it was a corporation that was ready to do that. The corporations were chartered for a very specific function, generally something for the public good, like the canal, or roads and bridges. And corporations were held to the charters. There were a number of them that the charter was pulled. They were disbanded for malfeasance, for not meeting the terms of their charters. In those early years, people paid a lot of attention to what was written in the charter.
right.
A couple of years ago, some reporters incorporated Murder Incorporated. And they had a beautiful business case about how much they were going to charge to kill people and so on. And that went through, and they paid the the fees. They were incorporated.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're not paying attention to the charter.
Right.
Right.
And there's a history of resistance to those abuses, and the Boston Tea Party was an example where people rose up and said, this, the East India Tea Company had special powers given to it from British Parliament, and they were hurting our domestic business, and so the people took it upon themselves to do some direct action.
They were trying to establish a monopoly.
Yeah, and the people, you know, in Boston wanted to stop that. So they had a sense of the abuse of corporations, and the Constitution does not really make corporations. The original Constitution does not do that any more than it talks about political parties.
Yeah.
Those are things that came along later that the people who founded the country had not anticipated having these giant corporations.
No.
I mean, that was just not part of their vision.
And throughout history, Abraham Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, Dwight Eisenhower, throughout our history, they warned us about corporations.
Right. Let's take some of this thinking and look at the aspect of democracy again. A few minutes ago, we talked about how big money in election campaigns can undermine real democracy, whether it's coming from out of state, like with the bottlers, or just if there's in the state. Are there other things that we could talk about relative to big money and especially corporate money in the electoral realm?
Well, one really big thing. I have a military background. I was for almost 10 years in the Army, and I saw repeatedly how time after time, for very shady reasons, for example, the Gulf of Tonkin got us into that gave us the rationale for getting into Vietnam.
And that was the claim by McNamara, Secretary of State Robert McNamara and Lyndon Johnson and those at the Johnson administration, that North Vietnam had attacked a U.S. ship that was in international waters, and that turned out not to be the case.
Right.
The truth came out later, but by that time we were well into that war, same as this phony baloney weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Sure.
And
Exactly.
on and on and on.
It's very easy for our politicians to succumb to all this lobbying pressure from the military manufacturers and military industrial companies. Very easy for us to get into wars, but once we're in there, here we are in Iraq and Afghanistan, what, 6,000 U.S. deaths later, still trying to figure out how to get out of there?
Yeah.
Very easy to get into, but hard to get out of.
And there's massive lobbying by weapons manufacturers because all they have to do is frighten Congress or claim that this brings jobs to your district or do various kinds of things, and they've got way more clout than your local peace group has.
Right.
And
Something like 51% or so of every U.S. tax dollar, for every U.S. tax dollar we spend, 51 or so cents goes to military spending.
Yeah.
And guess what? The privates and sergeants aren't getting that.
Right.
Sometimes they have to go on food stamps.
Right.
Who's getting that is the CEOs of the military industrial companies.
Yeah.
And the new contractors that are all over the place. These large contractors are making they're
It's huge money
private
and
companies.
a lot of fraud, and there's audits coming out of the Pentagon saying we don't know where the money went, we can't account for it. There's billions and trillions that they just don't know where it went, and the corporations that are taking that money, if they claim privacy and so forth, I mean it's like. And then, let alone just the electoral stuff. I got some things here. The House Majority Leader Eric Cantor, a Republican from Virginia, received $5.6 million in corporate-linked donations during the 2010 midterm campaign, and that had increased 40% between 2008 and 2010. Representative Spencer Backus from Alabama, the new head of the Financial Services Committee, received $5.6 million from the banking interests for 2010, and he wants to undo financial reform.
Surprise.
Representative Fred Upton from Michigan, new chair of the Energy and Commerce Committee, took $400,000 from energy and mining industries and from 2008 to 2010, energy and mining interests escalated their donations to Upton by 50%. So they look at who's going to be likely to win, and they'll switch from a Republican to a Democrat or vice versa. Doesn't matter to them. It's like whoever's chairing the committee, I want to make sure that person knows that they're accountable to me, the corporation, for getting
Right.
into office. And it's so blatantly corrupt, and everybody knows it.
Well, and now
Everybody knows it.
they can go to a congressman and just threaten to use their funds in the
Right.
next election.
I've heard about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is starting
Yeah.
to show up.
There's a case that came out of Minnesota that I just want to summarize this one. A state senator in Minnesota refuses to meet with anybody who supported his opponent. There's says when the Minnesota Nurses Association contacted and requested a meeting, they got a nasty surprise. His office sent a note back saying the senator will not meet with anyone who supported his opponent, either financially or otherwise. Quote, after some careful checking, I discovered that the MNA had donated to Kimball's campaign. Your association will be unable to schedule an appointment with Senator, the note said.
Wow.
It's rare that they put it in writing.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Look at the health insurance reform process that we just went
Yeah.
through. During his campaign, Obama promised that he said that a single-payer system makes the most sense.
He said that early on before he ran for president. So he knew that, but
So
He bailed
Max
out.
Baucus of Montana was appointed to chair that committee. He was a big recipient of health insurance money. The first thing taken off the table was single payer.
Right.
Yeah.
Surprise,
And-
surprise.
And you look at all the, I mean, people, again, across the spectrum are upset about the bailout of the banks. And the banks have been major contributors to congressional people for quite a few years. And would Congress have bailed out the banks if they had not been receiving money from the banks? Would they even have deregulated the banks in the 1990s if they had not received so much in the way of campaign contributions then? So what happens is they do that stuff, and the rest of us, not just the four of us, but everybody watching the program, gets left holding the bag in various kinds of ways, including
Right.
paying for bailouts or being victimized by what the banks do to us and whatever. So it's these things, it goes back to your initial thing at the beginning of the program about these things really affect our daily lives. I mean, it means somebody gets foreclosed upon because the bank was doing a shady thing, or your credit card rate goes up because of some deregulation, or your taxes because of a bailout. I mean, the corporate personhood really affects us directly.
And the more that these things happen, it seems like there should be stronger regulations. And the funny thing is, they're being relaxed.
We're going the other
Right,
way.
right. Tell us about the efforts you're doing in Olympia with your Move to a Band group, because you're taking this kind of information and you're connecting with ordinary people. You're doing public events, you're meeting, you're doing stuff, you're on TV.
Yes.
So tell us about your local Move to a Band group here in Olympia. You're sort of a key person there.
Well, sort of. We meet every couple weeks and we discuss the issues, and we plan on how we can get the word out. I think education is probably our number one goal, because I think as soon as you see what's happening, you will become interested in it or concerned about it, hopefully. And I think that the more that people know, the more we'll be able to make headway with doing a constitutional amendment.
And you have a blog, which is
Yes.
http:// and then the / and then it's M, the numeral 2, A, the hyphen, OLY dot blogspot.com.
Correct, correct.
Which I don't have memorized yet, but I should. What would somebody see if they visited that? What would they find there?
They'll find a number of articles and a few that we have actually written, some of our members have written. Generally, they are things that we have found on the internet, that we have liked, that we find to the point for this topic, and we post them there.
Okay.
That's basically.
Just
Lots
last
of
night I
information.
posted something called "Corporations Disturbing the Peace." It talks about the military angle of this thing and how to build an effective peace movement, we've got to address this issue.
Well, to build any movement, if you care about the environment, you've got to go after the big corporations that are abusing the commons.
Healthcare.
If you care about healthcare reform in a
Poverty.
profound way, poverty, any of these issues that our people care about, they go back to corporate personhood, and they go back to reforming our election campaign so that big money can't overwhelm the will of the people.
And this
right.
move to amend coalition, it's a national coalition. In West Virginia, there's quite a coalition going on to stop this destructive mountaintop removal type of coal mining going on. And that coalition over there is uniting Sierra Club, Wilderness Society, a lot of different groups that you wouldn't think, they seem kind of strange bedmates, but they were working together in an effective coalition to stop this.
Yeah, they've got faith communities in there too. It's amazing. They're
Yes.
really doing it.
People don't realize how big that is. Some of those, as we say, mountaintop removals can now be seen from space.
Yes, yes,
You
they
know,
can.
the gouge on the earth is so big. It's just amazing.
There's also some legislative. You mentioned one legislative effort there. You've got HJM 4005 and SJM 8007 in the 2011 legislature, and they're basically calling upon Congress to amend the Constitution.
Yes.
They're just basically they're short. I mean, they're not that long, and pretty straightforward. So those are things that people have been rallying around to. Sure. The House one has 20 sponsors.
Yes.
Yes.
Whoa, including
Wonderful.
both of the House members, Rectal and Hunt from the 22nd Legislative District, plus some from a bunch of other places. Let's we've talked mostly about the notion of corporate personhood, and there's this related thing that we've touched on a little bit, and that's the mistaken notion that giving money to an election campaign is speech that the First Amendment protects, and if you're a corporation that claims First Amendment rights, then you claim free speech rights to give away money as your form of expression. And what's your there's an effort underway to have that remedied through constitutional amendments as well. Can we talk about that? I've got some sample wording from that, but it's just basically pretty straightforward as well.
Yeah, I cannot. Can you speak to that?
Well, about the clean elections campaign or what?
Well, we'll couch that next.
Okay.
This is the constitutional thing. Let me just do. There's some wording here that's. It just talks about money. Giving money is not speech. It would just be like the parallel with the corporate personhood that says corporations are not people. The civil rights you have in the Constitution are for human beings, not for corporations. And this basically, the speech angle takes that same kind of an
it's
approach. And
limited to that.
And it says giving money to an election campaign is not constitutionally protected free speech. And so that would pertain to wealthy individuals as well as corporations. And there are several different kinds of wording. I saw several. I just thought I would note that, but that's part of the
Oh, yeah.
part of what we
Definitely
need.
part of it.
Because rich individuals as well as rich corporations can abuse
There's
that.
a thought that it may be possible to get at that kind of issue legislatively rather than through an amendment. Because, we have very complicated laws on hard money and soft money and so on.
Yeah.
And some of those areas, I think, could address that particular point.
Well, we have done TV programs here, and other people are working on trying to get big money out of campaigns. And one method is by offering optional public financing of campaigns. So if I'm going to run for office, instead of trying to spend all my time trying to raise money from all you rich people who are my friends to give me money for the campaign, I can say I'm going to limit my spending to a certain limit and have public funding available up to that limit. And that way, the candidate is beholden to the public and not to the special interest. You might be a real estate tycoon, you might be an insurance company, and you might be a weapons manufacturer or something. And this way I'd be beholden to the public. And Maine and Arizona have done that, and they've found that they've been able to have more diverse people running. So instead of just a bunch of rich people who have rich friends, they get more ordinary housewives, more minorities, more people of very modest financial means, and they, when the time comes for the election, if you're running for office on big money and Alita is running on public money, it's real clear to the voter that she's the one that's going to be more responsive to me as a voter than you, who are really owned by the insurance companies or
Sorry
the
about that.
But
or the
yeah,
real estate
yeah.
or whatever.
But in the days right before the election, I'm going to flood TV ads. Oh, you're
Well,
going
You
down.
would, you would.
Well, but the laws are actually pretty written pretty well, and there is an organization, Washington Public Campaigns, that's promoting that here. We've worked with Craig Salins before, and he's been a guest on our program. And their website is washclean.org, which is a great pun for the state of Washington, and the fact that we go on a wash our elections
Clean up
clean.
our elections.
So anyway, but that's another remedy for a problem that otherwise seems to be pretty much out of control. Can we talk some more about some of the organizations that are doing this work? I know that there are a lot of websites, and we'll offer a lot of them. Maybe we can be rolling some of those as we talk. But your Move to Amend group is the one that I think of first, because you're national, and then you got the local things. Well, are there other groups that you work with, or how do you function in the context where there are several groups doing things?
Well, we basically take advantage of all of their ideas. We haven't settled on any one particular way of doing this. We just know there's a very big problem and it needs to be addressed. And the final bill will be coming out of Congress anyway. So what we want to do is get the ideas out there and see how it gels at the end. But we got started with the Move to Amend because of Ricky Ott and David Cobb, who came here.
Oh, yes.
And Ricky Ott had fought the corporations with the Exxon Valdez.
Yeah.
That was a very big fight that's still going on.
And they've got more money than any of the sea otters or
That's for
the
sure.
shorebirds.
That's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yes.
There's one of the Ralph Nader organizations, Public Citizen, has, besides doing their own good work, they do some work on this corporate personhood, and they have, besides citizen.org, they have a group called www.don'tgetrolled.org, and they don't use the apostrophe in the name, but it's DONTGETROLLED.org, and they've got good stuff on there, and there's just a bunch of them. The Alliance for Democracy, whose website is thealliancefordemocracy.org. That's easy to remember. freespeechforpeople.org. Try to help us remember who gets free speech.
In my recent,
Yes.
recently, it seems like every time I open my mailbox, there's more, there's more fundraising letters in there. But lately, the Sierra Club, the Wilderness Society, Audubon Society, and several other groups, as well as Public Citizen, they're recognizing this corporate personhood thing as pivotal.
Yes.
As sort of the linchpin that's allowing a lot of damage to happen out there.
Yeah, I've been seeing that also, and I know like Craig Salins and Washington Public Campaigns, they see a real common bond with this, and other groups. So it's like strategically, that's how we're going to get leverage on environmental concerns, on peace, on a lot of things that we care about. The Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which has been around since I think about 1923 or thereabouts, has a really good 10-part study curriculum on corporate personhood, and I read all their materials several years ago, and you can get that at their website, which is WILPF.org, and then you've got a little thing you can click on to get their curriculum and print those out or read them on the screen.
Those are,
Filled
you
with
might add,
information.
those are free.
That's right, that's
they
free,
are
free
That's
stuff.
all free.
Yeah.
It's good
Yeah.
material.
I I think those are the groups that I had in mind, but it's impressive to see how much good stuff is out there. And your blog, which I'll repeat again here, can connect people with a bunch of those links. And then, so http://m, the numeral 2, a hyphen, oly.blogspot.com. Not easy to remember.
Let's
but
move to amend.
moved, yeah.
M2A.
Well, I know, yeah.
Holy,
Yeah,
holy.
yeah.
A lot of-
It's
yeah.
all-
Yeah, but people could also go to the National Move to Amend and probably find local groups. So even if somebody's watching this on their computer from another location, where's our local one in my city in
Wherever.
Pennsylvania
Yeah,
or
sure.
whatever. So
Another organization I'm in, the Veterans for Peace, the centerpiece on our literature table is something called Addicted to War by Joel Andreas.
Yes.
And this really, it's a very entertaining book that shows the connections between corporate power and
That's right.
military adventures overseas.
yeah, yeah, and it's visually it's pretty compelling as well. It's really good. How would you like people to be able to help your efforts? Come to the meetings, I suppose.
That would be good.
Share
That
their
would be good.
ideas. This is going to be, this is a pretty tough windmill we're tilting at, and we need ideas. We need to find the cracks in the armor.
Yes, yes.
And connect with either your organization or any of these others. If somebody already has an affinity for one of these other groups, work with the group that you're.
We're a coalition. We have a big umbrella, and we welcome you all.
Yeah, and including people across the political spectrum, like we've said.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
this is a place for your Tea Party friends. This is a place for your Republican friends, your Democrat friends, your independent,
Libertarian friends.
everybody, the whole range.
The goal is the important part,
Yeah,
and that is getting this changed,
yeah.
no matter who they join.
It's the kind of thing that you can strike up a conversation with people with. It's the kind of thing that would lend itself well to wearing a button. So you're in the grocery line and somebody says, what is that? And, oh, let me tell you about corporate personhood. It's like, whoa. and I mean, it's the kind of thing that you can really win with. Could we offer each a brief thought, and then we'll let people get on with their lives and start doing productive things when they turn off their TV. So closing thought from each of you.
Democracy is not a armchair exercise. Come join us. Get out and do something.
Great, thank you. Alita?
Keep on educating yourself. Keep on connecting the dots. If you are working for a cause, look for how it connects to corporate personhood, because it probably does.
This corporate personhood, corporate power is an octopus with a lot of tentacles, and it touches just about everything: health, environment, peace and war issues. You name the issue, it'll probably have a corporate element there.
Right, and so this would give leverage for all these, whatever issues you want to work on.
Apply your energy where it's at the pressure point.
Okay, good, thanks. Well, I want to thank Bert Lewis and Alita DeVee and Dave Zink. I want to thank all the folks who've been watching. As we've said during the program, that January 2010 Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission was something that caught everybody's attention because it was so blatantly partisan, for one thing, and just so sweeping, but also it's also just the tip of the iceberg, and that's part of a pattern that's been going on and getting worse for a number of years. So a lot of people caught their attention, and now's the time to act on it because it's hot, and we can get more people involved with this. That narrow 5-4 majority really overturned a number of things that had been settled before then. It entrenched the notion that money is speech. It entrenched the notion that corporations are persons, even though they never die like the rest of us will. It entrenched the notions that they have human rights, even though they're not human and they're often very inhumane. And we need to recapture our humanity, we need to recapture our Constitution and our rights, and we need to recapture our democracy. The notion of corporate personhood is part of that bold corporate agenda for grabbing more and more power, for dominating the regulatory process, where the government that we create, we the people create this, and they should be protecting the commons. And these corporations have found ways to put undue pressure on regulatory agencies, on governmental bodies, on executives, and now they've got even more power to buy elections. And that's something that outrages people across the political spectrum. They also are claiming privacy rights like we have, which allows them to further hide their abuses, their corruption, and their crimes. And we need to have more openness and transparency if we're going to retain democracy. The problem might seem just way too big, but it's an issue whose time has come. And there are remedies, and some of the remedies are relatively simple. The constitutional amendment is quite workable. We don't use it very often, but this may be the time. So here's an opportunity to really enhance democracy instead of corporate personhood. You can get information about a wide variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolence by contacting the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. We are at 360-491-9093. We have a great website, www.olympiafor.org. We have information about a variety of issues there, and if you want to contact us, we can provide you some of the website information that we've had here. We're all one human family. We all share one planet. We can make the world a better place, but we all have to do our part, and the world needs what you have to offer. Thanks.
Well, since that time, corporations have, their lawyers really, have attempted to gain for corporations all constitutional rights. A right to privacy, a nice one. And they have it, of course, because they are corporate people. And just as you and I have a right to privacy, so does the corporation. So when our meat inspectors go to the meat packing plant and knock on the door and want to come in and inspect, they're turned away. They can't do that because the corporation has a right to privacy. Our inspectors today, OSHA, go in to look for some sort of dangerous situation in the plant, has to not only announce their visit in advance, they have to get a warrant. They have to go to courts and get a warrant to do their inspection because of the right to privacy. And of course, we're going to come back, I'm sure, to talk more about the First Amendment rights.
Right. Yeah, you bet.
That are in Citizens United.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they've sort of crept into the area that we as real live human beings have, and they claim that those, and of course, all of us will die at some point.
Oh, yes.
I hope we make it through this hour of the program, but at some point we'll all go, but the corporation can live forever, and so you get that huge imbalance. Also, the giant corporations have a lot more money than,
the money is just,
than any of us, so it's an imbalance.
And people like us, we have more interests than just making money. We've got clean air, clean water, our kids' health, a lot of interest that real people have. But the corporation is a legal entity fixated on maximizing profit, maximizing profit. Concentrate on that. So if that was a person, it'd be a very psychopathic person.
Right, and they have the officers and the managers actually have an obligation to maximize profit. As much money as they want to election campaigns. The narrowest possible 5-4 majority overturned a century of settled law that had protected election campaigns from excess corporate influence. This decision further entrenched the notion, well, it also enriched some folks too, but it entrenched the notion that money is speech, and that corporations are persons who have free speech rights, same as real live human beings like you and I do. The Citizens United decision and the notion of corporate personhood are parts of a bold escalation of big business power grabs. In addition to buying elections, these giant corporations are increasingly aggressive in trying to manipulate regulatory agencies and to dominate all levels of government. The problem might be seeming too big, and solving it might seem too daunting, but it really is quite workable. We can solve the problem, but we have to pitch in and create the solutions. During this hour, we will examine the problems and we'll also explore the solutions. I'm happy to welcome three guests who are all active in the Olympia Move to Amend group, a group working to amend the Constitution to remove the notion of corporate personhood. They are Bert Lewis, Alita DeBee, and Dave Zink. Good to have you all here. We will have fun with this topic. It might not seem juicy at the outset, but people will discover, hey, this really pertains to my life. And Alita, let's start with you, because when we were preparing for the program, you were saying how there really are a lot of ways in our day-to-day lives where this connects. Tell us about that.
Definitely does connect. I have been looking at this issue for many years, and I realized from the outset that just about every part of my life it has to do with this topic. Everything from the commons, which is my water, my air, the land that I live on, the earth, everything that we consider something we share seems to be used by corporations in an unsustainable way. And they are using these things to the point of depleting them, or almost depleting them, at least making them very expensive for others to use. And also they are polluting them and making them unhealthy. So our health is involved with this, our day-to-day living with water and food, just about everything that's important to us.
Yeah, when we were
like
on the
food.
phone to prepare for you said, well, like take corn chips. You buy some corn chips at the grocery store, and you were able to trace through how the use of that corn through the giant agribusiness corporations that may have engineered the seeds and packaged it and done all the processing. And I mean, you go, yeah, there's big corporations involved in every step of that, and they're manipulating processes in ways that work to their advantage and against ours.
Yes, and part of the reason for that is profit. And profit means that the large agribusinesses are buying up smaller farms, making it so smaller farms have a harder time competing, and they're using their strength and power and their speech to manipulate the market so that they own the market.
So we'll talk during this hour about those kinds of things and the notion of corporate personhood, which we'll describe. There's another element of this program that has to do with how they mess up democracy by buying elections and so forth. Is there something that anybody wants to say at the outset about just that notion of the impact on democracy? And then we'll get on into some substance.
Well, the recent midterm elections just last year, 2010, I think that's a pretty good indication of what's coming. Massive amounts of corporate money coming in from outside the state to totally swamp the local concerns we have here.
One of the main points in the program is addressing this notion of corporate personhood that some people watching the show might know what that is and some people might not know. The notion, in terms of, in order to be able to enter into contracts or do business, a corporation is considered to be an artificial person so that it can actually sign a contract or do whatever. But the notion of a person has sort of gone way beyond that and traces back to an 1886 U.S. Supreme Court case, Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad Company, where somebody in the judge's office made a mistake and sort of misstated something.
There is debate about that. That may not have been a mistake. He had financial ties with the railroads.
Oh, okay. There you go. Anyway,
yeah.
could somebody talk about the concept? Maybe you could tell us something about this concept. What does that mean, the corporate personhood? Glenn Anderson with the Olympia Fellowship of Reconciliation. This TV series explores a variety of issues that relate to peace, social justice, and nonviolent social change. In January 2010, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission that big business corporations can give